The call came in just before dawn, the kind of hour when the city is quiet enough to hear your own doubts. Linda Carter had tried all week to reach her daughter-in-law, texts unanswered, calls going straight to voicemail. Tonight, the silence felt different, like a door bolted from the inside. She pressed the intercom once, twice, and listened. Beneath the hum of the hallway lights, a bass line thumped from behind the apartment door. Not a stereo whisper, not background TV, party noise. She wasn't the kind of woman who panicked easily. Life had already trained that out of her. Still, she dialed 911. Phoenix Police, what's your emergency? My daughter-in-law won't answer. My son passed a month ago. I'm worried. Something's wrong in there. The dispatcher kept the question's practical address. Names, whether she could see smoke or smell gas. Linda did what mothers do. She stood and waited. She tried not to think about the last time she'd stood outside this same door, clutching a casserole, telling herself grief would make a young widow quiet, not unreachable. 2 officers arrived within half an hour. Their presence calmed her only until one of them knocked and introduced himself. The bass track cut off mid-beat. Silence fell with intention, like someone pressing a finger to their lips. A pause. Another knock. Harder. A woman's voice came through the door, Alyssa flat, irritated, unfamiliar. Who is it? Phoenix Police. We need you to open up. The deadbolt scraped. The door cracked. Alyssa showed only part of her face. Mascara pooled at the corners of her eyes, not from crying but from a long night. Everything's fine. It's a welfare check, the officer said. Open the door, please. Something stubborn flickered in her expression. She hesitated, weighed defiance against authority, then swung the door wider. Linda saw the room in a sweep. She didn't catalog furniture or paint colors. None of that mattered now. What mattered were the empty bottles on the coffee table and the 3 men slouched on the couch, strangers who looked at Linda with the lazy, defensive stare of people who don't plan to explain themselves. Alyssa crossed her arms like a dare. It's my place. We were talking. Nobody looked like they'd been talking about Michael. It wasn't the bottles or the strangers that knocked the breath out of Linda. It was the floor near the TV stand, where a picture lay face down, the frame blistered and warped. The officers moved first. One stepped forward and flipped it over with 2 fingers. The glass had spider-webbed, the print underneath scorched at the edges. It had been a wedding photo. Michael in a rented tux, smiling like he never had to worry again. Alyssa's bouquet out of focus but bright. The burn had eaten across his jawline, into the white of his shirt, like a slow-moving erasure. Linda reached for the frame, the instinct so old it bypassed thought. She didn't pick it up, she couldn't. The officer set it on the console instead, making room for the conversation that had to happen. Ma'am, is anyone else here? He asked. Just friends, Alyssa said, bored with the scene already. We're fine. Neighbors reported a disturbance. A shrug. We received a welfare call from your mother-in-law. You haven't returned her messages. I don't have to answer my phone. Your husband died last month. A beat. I'm aware. The other officer's tone stayed careful, professional. We also need to ask about the photo. Alyssa's eyes drifted to the charred frame and back, like she was checking the oven timer. It fell. I was cleaning. Candle nearby. It happens. Linda's mouth went dry. You burned his picture. Accidents happen, Alyssa said. Then, as if correcting the record for the documentary camera that wasn't there, she added, and anyway, I'm free now. The sentence didn't land like a provocation, it landed like a verdict. Something in Linda's body reacted, an old tremor coupled with a back of the throat heat she associated with funerals and hospital hallways. The officers exchanged the quiet look of men deciding whether to push or de-escalate. Linda didn't want to fight. She wanted the truth plain, undeniable, obvious enough that even grief couldn't distort it. Alyssa, she said, keeping her voice low, I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because none of this makes sense. The 3 men on the couch snickered, not out of malice, more out of discomfort. They wanted this to end. In that sense, they and Linda wanted the same thing. The officer asked Alyssa to step into the hallway. She did, reluctantly. Linda followed. The door swung nearly shut behind them, cutting off the view inside. Out here, the air smelled like detergent and concrete dust from some remodel on another floor. When was the last time you spoke to Michael's mother? The officer asked. Alyssa glanced at the security camera tucked in the ceiling and then back to the officer, calculating. I don't know. The funeral. You were difficult to reach during arrangements, Linda said, careful on each word, because anything sharp would cut her too. You were already on the phone with an insurance company. You met an attorney. Before we buried him. Alyssa smiled without humor. Someone had to be a grown-up. That line, the offhand disdain of it, did more than insult. It suggested a worldview where logistics outrank love. Linda thought of the last voicemail Michael had left. Mom, she's not the same person. She plays along. Then she... He hadn't finished the sentence. The message ended with a glitch, a sound that, at the time, Linda had chalked up to bad reception. Now it felt like a clue. One officer keyed in notes on his body-worn tablet. The other shifted stance. Ma'am, if everything is okay, we're going to clear, but we need a contact number that works, and we need you to be responsive given recent events. Sure, Alyssa said, offering a number too quickly. The officer read it back. It matched what they had. The hallway fell quiet again. Linda looked down at her hands. The skin along the knuckles had thinned in recent years. Work does that to a person. She had used those hands to carry Michael through every phase: booster shots, first high, first cold call to a client, then to carry the urn. Now she folded them to keep them from shaking. I'm asking you, woman to woman, she said, what happened to my son that night? Alyssa could have said, I don't know. She could have said, ask the coroner. She could have said nothing. Instead, she tilted her head, as if invited to an argument, and said, he died. How? The words slipped out, barely a sound. People die, Alyssa said, turning for the door. Especially when they're stressed. You know how he worked. The officer stepped between them, not because anyone had raised a hand, but because he'd seen enough scenes like this to know when two truths were about to collide: the medical examiner's report and a mother's refusal to accept it as the whole story. Mrs. Carter, he said, gentle, if you learn anything new, call us. If you feel unsafe, call us. Tonight, it seems everyone is safe. No one in the hallway believed the word safe. It was a formality, like have a nice day on a county form. Alyssa slipped back inside, the deadbolt turning with a click that felt personal. The officers gave Linda a card. She took it without reading it. The corridor stretched empty in both directions, the kind of corridor that makes you aware of your pulse. She returned to the threshold, stared at the seam where the door met the jamb, and pictured the photo as it had been before the burn, her boy mid-smile, alive in a way that took up space. She had the sudden, physical certainty that the only road through this would be forward, not around, and that the cost would be paid in time, patience, and whatever strength she had left. She didn't faint because of drama. She fainted because her body understood before her mind admitted it. The world inside that door had already made its choice. In the second before blackness swept in, before the officer's hands grabbed her elbows, before the carpet met her knees, she heard Alyssa's muffled voice on the other side, half laughing, half tired. Tell her to stop calling. The camera, if there had been one, would hold on the burned photo, now upright on the console where the officer had set it. The frame leaned slightly to the left, as if listening. When Linda opened her eyes, the world was sterile, white, and humming. Hospital ceiling lights. A nurse checked her vitals, asked her name, her age, and if she knew where she was. She did. What she didn't know was how she'd ended up here. Then memory arrived all at once. The door, the music, the strangers, the burned photo, and the sentence, I'm free now. That one lodged like a splinter. She spent the next 2 days at home in near silence. The house still held Michael's voice in small ways, a forgotten mug, a necktie on the chair, the framed diploma from the University of Arizona Law School. Her son had made it further than anyone in their family's history, from a single mother's diner job to a national law magazine feature about young attorneys to watch. He'd been 36 when his heart gave out, the coroner said. No prior conditions, no warnings, just a fall in the doorway. They called it acute cardiac arrest. Linda called it impossible. She thought about every morning she'd woken at 4. 0 amperes. M to prep the cafeteria, the smell of grease and burnt toast clinging to her hair, all for him. She remembered the way he used to tell her, Mom, someday you won't have to work doubles. And he'd kept that promise. Paid off her mortgage at 30. Bought her a silver bracelet with the words, for everything you gave. That was the kind of man Michael was, until he married Alyssa. At first, she'd liked the girl bright, polite, college sweetheart type, called her Mom, brought flowers on birthdays. Then slowly things shifted. Calls between Linda and Michael became shorter, more guarded. When Linda asked about Alyssa, he'd say, "She's just tired, work's been rough." But his tone carried weight. It wasn't work wearing him down. The last call came 3 nights before his death. "Mom," he'd said, voice lower than usual. "She's not the same anymore." Static swallowed the rest. That was the last time she heard him alive. At the funeral, Linda sat in the front row, hands gripping the program until the paper softened with sweat. People said all the comforting phrases, "He's in a better place," "Time heals," but she wasn't listening. What she couldn't ignore was Alyssa, dry-eyed in black silk, whispering into her phone during the service. When Linda leaned closer, she caught the words policy and signature. It wasn't grief that occupied her, it was paperwork. The next morning, a man from Summit Life Insurance called the house. He asked for Mrs. Carter, meaning Alyssa. The policy, he said, had been transferred 2 years earlier, naming her as sole beneficiary. Linda's stomach turned. "For how much?" she asked. He hesitated. $2 million. By the time she hung up, she was shaking. $2 million, and her son's body wasn't even buried yet. Alyssa arrived at the mortuary that afternoon, late, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. "Don't look at me like that," she said before Linda could speak. "Michael wanted me taken care of." Linda swallowed the anger, but it stayed lodged. "Did he also want you to file a claim before his ashes cooled?" Alyssa didn't flinch. "I handle things fast. It's how I survive." Then she walked out to take a call with her lawyer. That night Linda couldn't sleep. She replayed everything. The silence, the sudden heart attack, the burned photo. Her mind looped over every small oddity. Why had Alyssa stopped coming around? Why did Michael look so tense the last time she'd seen him? Why did the police sound so certain that nothing was wrong? The human heart doesn't just stop for no reason, not his. The next morning she started a notebook. Day 1 questions. She listed what she knew, what she suspected, and what she could prove. She wasn't a detective, but she'd watched enough people underestimate women like her to know persistence beats training when you have nothing left to lose. The page filled quickly. Under evidence, she wrote one thing and underlined it twice. Alyssa is not grieving. She took the notebook to the kitchen, set it beside her coffee, and stared at the words. Then she added a second line. "If nobody believes me, I'll find proof myself." She didn't mean it as drama. She meant it as survival. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the faint tick of a clock that had stopped days ago. She would fix the clock later, she thought. First, she would fix the story. That evening, she found an old voicemail she'd ignored in the chaos of the funeral. It was Michael, time-stamped 3 days before his death. "Mom, I don't know what's going on with her. She's been meeting someone. If anything happens..." The message cut off. No name, no details, just static, but it was enough. Enough to know her son had been afraid, enough to know the story wasn't over. As the sky outside dimmed, Linda pressed play again and listened closely. Between the static and the wind on the line, there was another sound, maybe a door shutting, maybe a second voice. Male. She replayed it, turning the volume up until it cracked the speaker. "If anything happens..." Then silence. She whispered to herself. Something did happen. For the first time since the funeral, she didn't cry. Instead, she felt something new rising, not peace, not acceptance, a kind of cold focus. The kind that keeps you standing when the rest of the world looks away. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd start with the one person who might still care enough to help, Michael's old colleague at the firm. She didn't know what she'd find, but she knew she wouldn't stop until she understood how a healthy 36-year-old man could just drop dead. She closed the notebook, slid it under the lamp, and whispered to the empty room. "I'm coming for the truth, baby." The line hung in the air, steady and final. Somewhere inside that sentence was the beginning of a battle she didn't yet know she was strong enough to fight. But the decision was made. There would be no turning back. The law office sat on the 12th floor of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building Michael once joked about owning one day. When Linda stepped into the lobby, the receptionist glanced up, recognized the last name, and went pale. "You're his mother, aren't you?" she said softly. Linda nodded. A few minutes later, A man in his 30s approached, sleeves rolled up, eyes heavy with the kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing too much. "I'm Ethan Wynne," he said, Michael's friend, and partner on his last case. They moved to a conference room that still smelled faintly of coffee and paper dust. On the table sat a file folder already waiting. Ethan pushed it forward. "I didn't know if you'd come. I've been meaning to reach out." Linda's voice was steady. "You think his death wasn't natural either?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Let's say he didn't act like a man about to die. 3 days before, he told me he was scared." He opened the folder. Inside were screenshots messages Michael had sent him the night before he collapsed. "Something's off. She's meeting someone. If I vanish, don't let them call it a heart attack." The timestamp read 11:28 p.m. Linda stared at it until the numbers blurred. "Where was he that night?" she asked. Ethan tapped a map printed beneath the texts. According to his phone data, his signal cut off here about 3 miles from his house, nowhere near where they found him. Linda frowned. "Then why did they say he collapsed at home?" Ethan shrugged. "Because that's where the paramedics found him, but that doesn't mean that's where he fell." His car's dashcam showed he parked at a turnout off Route 60 that night. Passenger seat was pushed forward like someone shorter had been there. When I asked Alyssa, she said she hadn't seen him since morning. For a long moment they sat in silence. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Linda felt the pieces shift inside her mind, not yet forming a full picture but starting to move toward one. "Do you still have that footage?" she asked. Ethan nodded, pulled a small drive from his pocket, and slid it across the table. "I made a copy. You can't bring it to the police yet. They'll just say it proves nothing. But keep it safe." She picked up the drive like it was fragile. "Why are you helping me?" He met her eyes. "Because he helped me once. And because nobody should be buried under a lie." That night, back at her kitchen table, Linda watched the dashcam footage on her laptop. The image was dark, the grain of cheap night vision turning everything ghostly green. At 11:06, headlights flashed across a narrow stretch of road. Michael's car slowed, pulled over. For 20 seconds, nothing moved. Then the passenger door opened, and a figure climbed out smaller, wearing a hood, face hidden. The person walked into the darkness, and Michael sat there, unmoving, for nearly a minute before driving off. Linda replayed it over and over, heart pounding harder each time. Whoever that was, Michael hadn't told anyone. By midnight, she had a list of questions again. Why drive 3 miles out of town? Who was in that passenger seat? And what happened between that road and his front door? The next morning, she called the Phoenix police again, armed with details. The detective on duty sounded polite but detached. "Ma'am, we already reviewed the autopsy. There's nothing criminal here." "There's a video," she said, and his phone pinged miles from home. He texted someone that he was scared. "People say a lot when they're stressed," the detective replied. "But the medical report's clear. No foul play." She hung up before the conversation could circle again. For a moment, she just stared at her reflection in the blank screen of her laptop-tired eyes, lines of worry, the look of a woman being politely dismissed by people who should have cared. Then she remembered something Michael had told her when he'd first passed the bar. Truth only matters if someone refuses to drop it. That afternoon, she took the footage and copies of the messages to a local journalist she'd met years earlier through a church fundraiser, Emily Ross, now an investigative producer at WBN. Emily listened without interrupting, scrolling through the screenshots, frowning at the map. "I can't promise a story," she said finally, "but this doesn't smell right." "Can you prove it?" Linda asked. "Maybe," Emily said, "but proving something like this means pressure. It means people who'd rather it stay quiet start making noise." Linda didn't care. Let them make noise. 2 days later, Emily called. "We found something. Michael's name appears on surveillance footage from the parking garage of his office, but the timestamp's wrong. It shows him entering the building an hour after he was supposed to be home. And whoever left that garage after him wasn't him. Height, posture, gait, they don't match." Linda felt her throat tighten. "Then who was it?" "We don't know yet," Emily said. "But your daughter-in-law's car was seen on a traffic camera less than half a mile from that spot, at midnight." The line went silent for several seconds. When Emily spoke again, her tone was careful. "If you're right, this isn't just a family tragedy. It's a cover-up." That night, Linda sat on her couch with the lights off. On the wall opposite her, The photo of Michael she'd rescued from the ashes leaned slightly crooked in its new frame. She couldn't look away. "We're close, baby," she whispered. "They can't hide this forever." Outside, the city kept moving, cars, sirens, lives that didn't pause for anyone's grief. But inside that small living room, a line had been crossed. She wasn't just a mother in mourning anymore. She was the only witness left who refused to let his story die. By the end of the week, the story had started to slip through Phoenix like a rumor with teeth. Someone at WBN leaked a fragment of the footage, just a few seconds, showing a hooded figure outside Michael's car and Alyssa's SUV appearing on the same road minutes later. It wasn't enough to name names, but it was enough to stir suspicion. Comment threads filled with strangers debating what Linda already knew in her bones. This wasn't natural. This was planned. The police called again, tone clipped, suddenly interested. They wanted copies of everything, the dashcam, the texts, even the messages from Ethan. Linda met them at the precinct with her hands trembling around the manila folder. Detective Harper, the same one who had brushed her off, tried to sound apologetic. "We just want to make sure we didn't miss anything." "You did," Linda said flatly. "You missed the truth." They ran tests again, deeper this time. Toxicology expanded. Forensic reanalysis ordered. Linda didn't understand the scientific language in the reports, but Emily did. She called late one night with the results. They found trace compounds in his system that can trigger heart failure untraceable in standard tests. It's a sedative used in veterinary medicine. Dissolves fast. Linda sat in silence. "You're saying someone poisoned him?" "I'm saying someone wanted it to look natural." That sentence changed everything. The next morning, WBN greenlit a full investigative special. Title, "Death of an Attorney, Accident or Murder for Money." Emily's team began piecing together Michael's final month's insurance papers, financial logs, Alyssa's sudden spending spike right after the policy change. The network's legal department warned them to move carefully, but the producers saw the potential. "If this airs," Emily said, "we'll have every major outlet watching." For the first time in weeks, Linda felt something close to hope. She wasn't delusional anymore. She was credible. Still, each victory carried its own cost. Alyssa must have heard about the broadcast plans because her tone shifted. She sent Linda a single text. "You don't know what you're starting. No punctuation, no warmth, just threat disguised as warning." Ethan advised caution, but Linda refused to back down. "If she's innocent," Linda said, "she shouldn't be afraid of daylight." 2 nights later, Emily called again. "You should sit down." The team had accessed security footage from a hotel downtown. In it, Alyssa appeared with a man tall, mid-30s, gym-built baseball cap, low entering and leaving together over multiple nights. They'd used an alias for the reservation, but the credit card matched Alyssa's. His name was Ryan Cole, local gym owner, no criminal record, at least not on paper. Emily's voice grew tense. "Here's the kicker. The night Michael died, Ryan's phone pinged off the same tower as Alyssa's, and the same as Michael's final location." Linda stared at the wall. "You think they did it together?" Emily hesitated, then said what Linda already feared. "It fits. Motive, opportunity, pattern." Days later, Summit Life Insurance quietly froze the $2 million payout, pending investigation. Legal papers started to circulate. The story was snowballing beyond anyone's control. And yet, in the middle of it all, Linda's grief didn't feel lighter. Every headline that mentioned Michael's name without the word justice still hurt. Then came the preview. A 30-second teaser aired one evening between commercials for local news. A rising attorney dies suddenly. A widow moves fast. Was it fate or design? The network logo cut to black. Online, the clip exploded hashtags, Reddit threads, conspiracy videos. People wanted blood, truth, both. Linda watched from her couch, hands clasped so tight they hurt. She hadn't wanted spectacle. She'd wanted closure. But now there was no turning back. Public curiosity had become her only ally. The next morning, she opened her front door to find 2 reporters on her lawn. "Mrs. Carter, do you believe your daughter-in-law killed your son?" one asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped past them, into the sunlight, and said to the second reporter, "Ask her that question instead." That afternoon, Alyssa held her own press conference through her lawyer. He called the media irresponsible and accused WBN of defamation. Alyssa herself stood silent beside him, wearing black again, pretending to mourn. When a reporter asked if she'd ever taken money from her husband's insurance, she smiled faintly. "I earned every dollar my husband wanted me to have." That evening, Ethan stopped by Linda's house. He looked uneasy. "She's not going to go quietly," he said. "People like her never do. She's going to play the victim until the evidence crushes her." Linda poured him coffee and said quietly, "Then we'll make sure it does." Outside, news vans parked along the street. Inside, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing messages from strangers, other families who'd lost loved ones suddenly, thanking her for not giving up. She realized this fight wasn't only hers anymore. Somewhere in the chaos, Michael's story had become a mirror for every person who'd ever been told to move on. But when she went to bed that night, there was a sound she couldn't shake faint, rhythmic tapping at the edge of her memory. The sound of someone knocking. The sound from that first night. She turned off the light and whispered to the darkness, "If this is you, baby, I'm still listening." Outside, the city buzzed with speculation, but inside her chest, Linda felt only one steady beat, not of fear but resolve. Tomorrow, WBN's full special would air. And when it did, she knew the world would finally see the woman her son had married and the lie she'd built her freedom on. The WBN broadcast hit like a storm. 8 p.m. Sharp, the logo faded, and the narrator's voice began. "In tonight's investigation, we follow the death of attorney Michael Carter, once ruled a natural cardiac arrest. But new evidence suggests something else. Manipulation, money, and murder." Millions watched. In living rooms across America, strangers leaned forward, eyes fixed on screens. And in one of those rooms, Linda Carter sat motionless, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. The footage rolled, the dashcam clip, the text messages, the GPS map, then the image that changed everything, the hooded figure exiting Michael's car and walking toward the shadows. The narrator's voice dropped lower. "Expert analysis shows this person's build does not match Michael Carter's, but surveillance from a nearby parking lot captures the same figure, later removing a silicone mask and wig. That man was identified as Ryan Cole, the gym owner seen repeatedly with Michael's widow, Alyssa Carter." Linda's breath caught. The next clip sealed it. CCTV from the hotel downtown showed Alyssa and Ryan entering together night after night. Receipts, time-stamped, undeniable. Over 6 months, the report continued, Alyssa Carter withdrew nearly $70,000 in cash with no recorded purchases to show where it went. Then came the phone records, overlapping GPS pings, and the audio recording Alyssa's voice, cold and mechanical. "It's done. He drank it. There'll be no trace." The studio cut to the host, her tone grave. "We have confirmed with multiple forensic experts that the compound used can mimic cardiac arrest, leaving little residue in standard autopsies. Investigators now believe Michael Carter's death was staged." Linda covered her mouth, tears welling but not falling. On screen, photos of Michael filled the background. Graduation, his first courtroom win, a candid laugh caught mid-sentence. The words beneath read, "Murdered for $2 million. Within an hour, social media detonated. Number Justice for Michael trended nationwide. Viewers flooded comment sections with outrage. "She killed him. Arrest Alyssa now." How many others get away with this? The wave was unstoppable. Summit Life issued a statement suspending all payment until the investigation concluded. And by morning, Phoenix PD announced the formation of a special task unit. When reporters showed up at Linda's door again, she didn't hide. She stepped outside, voice steady. "My son believed in truth. He practiced it every day in court. He deserves that same truth now." Cameras clicked, the footage ran on the morning news, and across the country, people began to see her not as a grieving mother but as a fighter. Meanwhile, Alyssa disappeared from public view. Her house emptied overnight. Neighbors said they saw a moving van around 2:0 a.m. No one knew where she went. Ryan vanished too, closing his gym without notice, but the net was already tightening. Police found fingerprints in Michael's car that matched Ryan's, and hotel staff confirmed Alyssa had reserved rooms under his alias. Then came the call Linda had been waiting for. Emily's voice, urgent. "They've issued arrest warrants for both of them." That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the glow of the streetlights painting her face in thin gold. It wasn't joy she felt. It wasn't even relief. It was exhaustion, the kind that settles only when the chase begins to end. She thought of Michael's voice again. "Mom, she's not the same person." He'd known. Somehow, he'd seen it coming. Around 4 in the morning, she finally drifted off. The knock came minutes later, sharp, measured, familiar. At first, she thought she'd dreamed it. Then it came again louder. She froze. The clock read 4:27 amperes. Through the intercom camera, a hooded figure stood on her porch. The street lamp caught a flash of pale skin, smudged eyeliner. Alyssa. Linda's pulse surged. She pressed the button to speak, her voice cracking. "What do you want?" "You ruined everything," Alyssa hissed, her tone wild but deliberate. "Come outside. Let's talk like family." Linda's hand shook as she reached for her phone. "You shouldn't be here. The police—" "Don't say that word," Alyssa shouted. "You think they'll save you? You think the world cares about your sad little story?" Her other hand lifted into view. Holding something small and silver, a lighter, she raised a folded newspaper soaked at the edge with fluid. "You destroyed my life. Now I'll destroy yours." Linda backed away from the screen, heart hammering. She dialed 911 again, whispering to the dispatcher, "She's here. She's outside my door. She has fire." The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Stay inside, ma'am. Lock the doors. Units are on their way." Outside, Alyssa kept talking, pacing. He was weak. He thought love meant ownership. "I gave him a way out." She laughed, a sound so unhinged it didn't echo like laughter, more like something tearing. "He wasn't supposed to die like that, but he wouldn't let go, so I helped him." The sirens arrived seconds before she struck the lighter. Blue and red flooded the neighborhood. Officers shouted commands as they rushed up the walkway. "Drop it! Hands where we can see them!" Alyssa hesitated, her expression shifting from rage to disbelief, like she hadn't expected the world to arrive so fast. Then she screamed, dropped the lighter, and bolted for the side gate, but she didn't get far. The police tackled her to the ground, the sound of cuffs snapping echoing across the cul-de-sac. Linda watched through the peephole, every muscle shaking. One of the officers knocked gently. "Ma'am, it's over. She's in custody." She opened the door. The cold air hit her like a shock. Alyssa was being lifted to her feet, hands behind her back, mascara streaked down her face. She looked up, saw Linda standing in the doorway, and sneered. "You think this makes you strong? He's still dead." Linda met her gaze, voice quiet but sharp as glass. "Yes, but now the truth isn't." The officer guided Alyssa toward the car. As the door shut, her voice cracked through the night, a single, wordless scream swallowed by the sirens. Inside, Linda leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. Her body was trembling, but her eyes were dry. She whispered to the empty house. "It's done, Michael. It's finally done." Outside, dawn began to rise not as redemption, but as proof that darkness never stays forever. The arrest was only the beginning. The trial, the headlines, the arguments, all that would come later. But in that moment, for the first time in months, Linda allowed herself to breathe. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Phoenix widow arrested for husband's murder. Every major network carried it, flashing side-by-side photos of Michael's bright smile and Alyssa's mugshot, hair matted, eyes vacant, mascara turned to soot. Ryan Cole had been caught hours later at a budget motel near Tucson, dragged from bed half-dressed, muttering that it wasn't his idea. He didn't resist. He didn't even ask why. He already knew. Detectives pieced together what Linda had long suspected. The sedative was ordered from an offshore website weeks before Michael's death. Alyssa's search history showed phrases like simulate heart attack, insurance payout laws, and how long before autopsy traces vanish. It wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated, calculated, cruel. When the detectives met Linda in person to go over the case, she listened in silence, her hands folded over a cup of black coffee gone cold. "They're both facing murder charges," Detective Harper said. "We're filing for aggravated circumstances, premeditation, financial motive, and obstruction." He paused, his earlier arrogance gone. "You were right, Mrs. Carter, all along." She didn't gloat. Being right doesn't bring him back. Court proceedings began within weeks. The courthouse steps became a war zone of cameras, reporters, and protesters holding signs that read number "Justice for Michael." Linda walked past them each day without speaking, her posture steady, eyes forward. She wasn't there for spectacle, she was there for closure. Inside, the defense strategy was clear: discredit the evidence, frame Ryan as the mastermind, and Alyssa as the manipulated partner. But recordings don't lie. Prosecutors played the audio of Alyssa's voice, detached and icy. "It's done, no traces." When asked about it, she claimed deepfakes, editing, conspiracies, anything but truth. The jury didn't buy it. Ryan flipped first. He confessed in exchange for a reduced sentence. "It was her plan," he said on record. She said he'd never give her freedom unless he was gone. She mixed it in his drink. "I just helped clean up." The courtroom fell silent. Linda sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. Alyssa didn't look at her once. Months had passed since the sentencing. The courts had closed their files, the reporters had moved on, and the public's outrage had found new stories to feed on. But inside Linda Carter's home, time felt different, slower, quieter, and still heavy with the echo of her son's voice. The air in his room still carried the faint trace of his cologne. His framed law license still hung on the wall, the ink on his signature crisp and permanent, like a promise he had never broken. The settlement money sat untouched inside a sealed envelope on her kitchen counter. $2,500,000, a number that made people whisper words like justice and closure. But to Linda, it felt like a curse wrapped in paper. Blood money, the price of her child's life. Every night she looked at it and thought, how do you turn something born from death into something that gives life? One evening, as she sorted through Michael's old case files, she found a handwritten note tucked between the pages of an unfinished brief. The paper had yellowed slightly, and the ink had faded, but the words were clear. "Someday, I want to start a scholarship for kids who cannot afford law school. Real justice needs people who know what it feels like to fight for it." She read the sentence again and again until her eyes blurred. That night, she decided what to do. The next morning, she called Ethan Nguyen, Michael's colleague and closest friend. "Ethan," she said, "I need your help. I want to build something in his name, something that lasts." He didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need, Linda. We'll make it happen." Over the next few months, they met with lawyers, accountants, and education boards. Slowly, the plan took shape. The Michael Carter Justice Foundation was born, a scholarship fund for students from working-class families, those who had the passion for law but not the privilege to pursue it. Linda wanted it to represent everything Michael had stood for: honesty, fairness, and courage in the face of power. When the foundation launched, the response was overwhelming. Letters came from every corner of the country, handwritten notes, folded checks, and envelopes filled with cash from people who had followed Linda's story. A single mother in Ohio wrote, "You reminded me that truth still matters." A retired teacher from Montana sent $50 with a note that said, "For the next Michael Carter." Donations began to pour in, small amounts, but countless. Within 3 months, the fund had tripled. Linda never once saw it as her money. It belonged to the future. When the foundation was ready, WBN News aired a follow-up documentary titled "The Mother Who Brought Justice to Justice." The tone was gentle this time. No suspense, no sensationalism. Just quiet shots of Linda arranging papers inside a modest office above a bookstore in downtown Phoenix. Sunlight poured through the windows, and Michael's portrait hung on the wall. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Truth does not end at the verdict." The first group of scholarship students arrived that spring, 10 young men and women chosen from over 200 applicants across the United States. They came from every kind of background: a young woman from Chicago who had waited tables to save for tuition, a veteran from Texas who wanted to defend wrongfully accused soldiers, a boy from rural Kansas who had lost both parents but dreamed of becoming a prosecutor. On orientation day, Linda stood at the front of the room. She wore simple black and held her notes, though she never looked at them. "My son believed justice was not a job," she said. "It was a promise. You are here because you still believe in that promise. The world will test you. It will try to harden you. But remember what brought you here: compassion. Fight for the truth, even when it costs you something." The students stood to applaud, and for a moment, Linda saw Michael's spirit reflected in every hopeful face. 1 year later, the foundation had grown larger than she ever expected. Donations kept coming, and the first recipients had already begun their studies. Many wrote to her about their progress. One message arrived late one evening from a student named Marcus, the very first scholarship winner. "Mrs. Carter, today I stood in court for my first case and I won. I thought of Michael the whole time. Thank you for making this possible." Linda read the message twice, then looked at her son's photo on the wall. "You see that, baby?" she whispered. "They are carrying you forward." That weekend, she visited Michael's grave for the first time since the trial had ended. The air was cool, and a thin mist clung to the grass. She knelt, brushed the dust off his headstone, and placed a single white rose at its base. "I kept my word," she said softly. "You have justice now. But more than that, you have a legacy." The wind stirred, gentle but insistent, rustling the leaves above her. For a moment, it felt like Michael was answering not in words, but in presence. The pain that had filled her for so long began to loosen its grip. As she stood, she turned back once more toward the grave. "I miss you," she said, "but I finally understand what you meant by justice. It was never about punishment. It was about purpose." If a camera had been there, it would have pulled back slowly, showing one woman standing alone beneath the vast Arizona sky, her black coat fluttering in the wind, the city lights shimmering faintly on the horizon. But Linda didn't need a camera. She had peace. For the first time in 2 years, she smiled, not the kind of smile that hides pain, but one born of quiet strength. Her story, and Michael's story, no longer ended in death. It lived on every time a student picked up a law book, every time someone dared to tell the truth, every time justice found its voice again. Over the following weeks, the prosecution presented the timeline in brutal precision: the sedative dose, the drive, the staged collapse near the apartment door. Alyssa's frantic call to 911 crafted to sound panicked, every lie laid bare under fluorescent lights. When the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty. Alyssa Carter, life sentence. No parole for 25 years. Ryan Cole, 20 years as an accomplice. The judge's words cut through the room like iron. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of profit and deceit. Reporters swarmed Linda as she stepped outside, but she spoke only once. "My son believed in justice," she said calmly. Today, justice answered him back. In the weeks that followed, Summit Life formally revoked the insurance claim. The court awarded restitution and damages to Linda, nearly $2.5 million. When her lawyer asked what she planned to do with it, she didn't hesitate. Something good. Something that means he didn't die for nothing. That night she sat alone in the quiet of her home. For the first time in months, no flashing lights outside, no reporters, no noise. The house was still, like a wound finally beginning to close. She opened her son's old case files and ran her fingers over his notes, margins full of arguments, scribbles, the words, "Truth always wins." She whispered to the air, "You were right, baby. But grief is strange. Even victory feels heavy." Linda still woke some nights expecting to hear his footsteps, still reached for her phone when something reminded her of him. Yet in the silence, something had shifted. Justice hadn't erased the pain, but it had given it purpose. Weeks later, Emily called from WBN. "We're doing a follow-up," she said. "Not about the crime, about you." Linda laughed softly. "About me? What's left to say? People see you as a symbol now, perseverance, truth. We want to show what comes after justice." Linda hesitated, then said, "All right, but I want to talk about Michael, not me." When the cameras came again, she didn't flinch this time. She spoke clearly, without anger. "I didn't fight because I needed revenge," she said. "I fought because truth doesn't defend itself. Someone has to hold the line." Across the country, millions watched again, but this time, not for scandal, for closure, for the simple courage of a woman who refused to be told to let it go. Later that night, Emily sent her a text. "You did it." America listened. Linda sat by the window, the city glowing outside. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked up at the stars, faint, scattered, the way Michael used to describe truth itself. Always there, even when you can't see it yet. She smiled faintly and whispered, "We did it, baby. We finally did it." 1 year later, the Michael Carter Justice Foundation had already become more than a scholarship fund. It had become a movement. Across universities and law schools in the United States, students wore small silver pins shaped like balanced scales with the initials MCJF etched beneath them. It was a quiet symbol, but it carried a loud message. Truth costs, but silence costs more. By the second anniversary of Michael's death, the foundation had awarded 25 scholarships to students from 10 different states. Linda had learned to speak at events, something she once feared. Her voice was still gentle, but it carried a steadiness that audiences leaned into. "We do not heal by forgetting," she often said. "We heal by building something that remembers." One spring morning, she received an invitation from the Arizona Bar Association to deliver a keynote address at their annual conference, the same professional circle where her son once stood proudly as a rising defense attorney. Linda hesitated before accepting. Public speaking had never been her comfort zone, but this was different. This was Michael's world. On the day of the event, the conference hall was filled with hundreds of lawyers, judges, professors, and students. As Linda took the stage, she saw the faces of people who had lived their lives inside courtrooms, arguing, defending, sentencing, but rarely feeling. She began simply, without notes. "My son loved this profession," she said, her voice firm but calm. "He believed that justice should never be for sale, not to money, not to power, not to fear. When he died, the system said it was natural causes. It took a mother's refusal to accept that answer for the truth to be seen. And that truth changed everything. But what I learned is this: justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins in conscience." The hall was silent. Some took notes. Some just watched. She continued, "You all have the power my son once had to decide what truth is worth to you. So, decide carefully. Because the world doesn't crumble from lies alone. It crumbles when good people stop asking questions." When she finished, the audience stood. The applause was long, unforced, and genuine. A judge approached her afterward and said, "Mrs. Carter, I've sat on the bench for 30 years. Today I was reminded why I started." Later that night, back at her office, Linda turned off the lights and sat by the window overlooking downtown Phoenix. The city was alive, cars moving, lights blinking, 1,000 stories crossing each other. Somewhere out there, a young lawyer she'd helped was preparing for their first trial. Somewhere else, a student she'd never met was reading Michael's name on the foundation's website and deciding to keep going. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus again, the first scholarship recipient. "Mrs. Carter, today I passed the bar exam. I'm officially an attorney. I'm dedicating my career to wrongful conviction cases. Michael would be proud." Linda read it twice. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she whispered, "He is proud, and so am I." That weekend, she returned to the cemetery. It was April 15th, the date Michael had passed 2 years before. She arrived early, just as the sun was rising over the red hills. The air smelled of sage and rain. She knelt by the grave, ran her hand across the smooth stone, and smiled. 2 years, she said softly. "You were 36 when you left. But look at what you've built since. 25 students. A movement. A voice that keeps speaking even when you cannot." She placed a single letter on the grave, Marcus's message printed on paper. Beside it, she laid the same silver pin the students wore. The light caught it, making the scales shimmer faintly. As she stood, a small breeze lifted the edges of her hair. The morning sun warmed her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes and felt something like presence, not the haunting kind that grief brings, but the peaceful kind that love leaves behind. She whispered, "You can rest now, baby. Justice is working." And with that, she turned and walked down the cemetery path, her steps light, steady, and sure. The camera of memory, if it had been filming, would have pulled back slowly, one woman walking alone under a golden sky, the city waking behind her, and a legacy shining quietly in her hands. Because sometimes, in the long after of tragedy, justice doesn't roar, it endures. The following winter brought something unexpected calm, not the empty kind, but the earned kind. The noise had quieted. The headlines that once screamed murder for money were long buried under newer scandals. Yet for many across the country, Linda Carter's story remained a touchstone, the proof that one person, even without power or position, could drag the truth into the light. By then, The Michael Carter Justice Foundation had expanded beyond Arizona. Law schools in California, New York, and Georgia joined as partners. 38 students now carried the foundation's banner, many working in public defense, legal aid, and investigative law. For the first time, Linda's name appeared not in crime stories but in education journals. They called her the Reluctant Reformer. She never liked the title, but she understood why they used it. In interviews, she was always modest. "I am not extraordinary," she would say. "I am just a mother who refused to believe a lie." Those words became the tagline of the foundation's annual report. Ethan Wynn, now its executive director, often reminded her that she had done more for legal education reform than most institutions ever had. But Linda never saw herself as a leader. "I'm just keeping his promise," she'd say. "He started it, I'm finishing it." By the third anniversary of Michael's death, the foundation hosted its first national seminar, The Ethics of Truth in Modern Law, held at the University of Arizona. Students, judges, and professors filled the auditorium. The keynote speaker was Marcus, Michael's first scholarship student, now a licensed attorney. When he took the stage, his voice trembled slightly. "I never met Michael Carter," he said, "but I carry his name every day I walk into court. Because what his mother built isn't just a scholarship, it's a reminder that the law must have a heart." Linda sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly, her eyes glistening. When the applause came, she didn't rise right away. She just looked up at the stage and thought, he would have smiled at that. That evening after the seminar, Marcus approached her. He was tall now, confident, wearing his first tailored suit. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I just wanted you to know the case I argued this week saved a man from a wrongful conviction. A single mother's testimony turned the verdict. She said your story gave her the courage to speak." Linda felt her throat tighten. "That's justice, Marcus," she said quietly. "That's all Michael ever wanted." When she returned home that night, the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt alive again. The desk where she once cried over unanswered questions now held framed photos of smiling students. The envelope that once contained the insurance settlement had been replaced by a brass plaque reading, "Michael Carter Justice Foundation, Truth, Legacy, Purpose." She sat at her kitchen table, poured herself a cup of tea, and looked out the window. The desert sky beyond Phoenix stretched wide and red, fading to indigo. Somewhere out there, people were still struggling, still lying, still fighting to be heard. That was the nature of the world, always breaking, always mending. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily Ross at WBN. "Linda, our new documentary on the foundation just aired. It's already trending. People are calling you the heart of American justice." Linda smiled faintly and typed back, "Justice has no heart unless people give it one." She set the phone aside and walked into the living room. On the mantel sat the only photo she'd never moved: Michael on graduation day, robe slightly crooked, grin wide and boyish. She traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip. "We did it, baby," she whispered. "Not perfectly, not completely, but we did it." Outside, the winter wind pressed softly against the windows. The house creaked in reply, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. In the final shot of her story, if there were a camera to catch it, Linda Carter would not be crying or broken. She would be standing at her window, watching the desert sunrise return for another day. Her hands, the same hands that once trembled over a phone call to the police, now rested calmly against the sill. Justice, she had learned, was not a moment. It was a lifetime of holding on when the world lets go. And as the morning light spread across the horizon, the narrator's voice, calm, reflective, would close the story. In a world that often mistakes silence for peace, one woman proved that truth is not found. It is built piece by piece, life by life, until it stands tall enough to be seen. By the 5th year of the foundation, what began as one mother's private crusade had evolved into a national conversation. Universities started citing the Carter model in ethics courses. Documentaries about the case appeared on major streaming platforms, and think tanks discussed the Carter principle, the moral obligation of truth in systems built on convenience. But for Linda Carter, the fame never mattered. She still lived in the same modest house outside Phoenix, still drove the same 10-year-old car. Every morning, she followed the same ritual: black coffee, one candle lit under Michael's photo, and a whispered, "Let's keep going." Ethan often joked that she ran the foundation like a mission, not an organization. "That's because it is one," she would reply. And she meant it. The foundation wasn't about law, it was about conscience. Each letter from a student, each story of a life changed, reminded her that justice didn't end at the courthouse. It began at the kitchen table, with someone deciding to care. The walls of the office were now covered with photos of scholarship graduates, 43 in total. Some had become prosecutors, others defense attorneys, some journalists investigating corruption. One, a young woman named Layla, was working on Capitol Hill, drafting a bill on corporate transparency. She often called Linda for advice. "You're the reason I went into public service," she once said. "You showed me that justice doesn't retire." That winter, Linda received an invitation to Washington, D.C. The Department of Justice was honoring her with the National Citizen Service Medal, the highest civilian recognition for contributions to ethics and law. For a moment she hesitated. Awards had never been her goal. But Ethan insisted. "You don't accept it for you," he said. "You accept it for him and for what you built." In March of 2030, she stood on the stage of the Kennedy Center. The audience rose when her name was announced. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her gray hair pinned neatly back. When she stepped up to the microphone, her voice was steady but soft. "I never asked to be here," she began. "I only asked for the truth, and when no one would look for it, I learned how." A small pause. "This medal, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who has ever been told to stop asking questions. To every mother who has sat across from a system and said, 'No, you're wrong.' To every student who refuses to sell their soul for convenience. Justice isn't born in court. It's born in heartbreak and rebuilt in hope." The applause was thunderous, yet Linda barely smiled. Her eyes were wet but calm. That night, she returned to her hotel room overlooking the Potomac River. She took off the medal, laid it on the nightstand, and opened the window. The city glowed in amber light. Somewhere below, a siren wailed faintly, and she thought of that first night, the phone call, the door unanswered, the police arriving too late. She whispered into the quiet, "We made it, Michael. We really did." In the years that followed, the Michael Carter Justice Foundation continued to grow. It expanded into mentorship programs, legal aid networks, and community education workshops for underprivileged youth. A decade later, one of its earliest students, Marcus, became its executive director. Under his leadership, the foundation opened chapters in 7 states. On Michael's 20th memorial, a bronze statue was unveiled at the University of Arizona's law school courtyard, a young lawyer holding a book in one hand and a scale in the other. At its base was a single inscription: "Justice delayed is not justice denied, not if someone keeps fighting." Linda, now in her 70s, stood at the ceremony, leaning slightly on her cane. The crowd applauded, cameras rolled, but she seemed elsewhere, gazing quietly at the statue, as though seeing her son again. When asked to say a few words, she simply smiled and said, "My son once believed that justice needed a voice. Turns out it needed an echo." As dusk fell, she returned home and sat in her garden beneath the old jacaranda tree. The petals had begun to fall, soft and purple, carpeting the ground. She closed her eyes, feeling the cool air brush her cheeks. "I'm tired, baby," she whispered, "but it's a good kind of tired." The scene would fade, the tree swaying gently in the desert wind, the stars emerging over Phoenix, the light in her window still burning. And if this were a documentary, the narrator's final words would be simple. In a country built on laws, one woman reminded us that justice has a soul. Her name was Linda Carter. Her fight began with loss and ended with legacy.